From this episode, we'll talk about the cult of the dead, Saqqara, the burial place, the place for the Step Pyramid, will be the most important thing that will introduce to you, but not only the cult of the dead, but major adventure and discoveries.
"5,000 years ago, a nation started to build monuments destined to last through the centuries. They drew up a writing system in which they could hand down their thoughts and achievements to future generations. They accomplished tasks in which they could gain hold of eternity. The people of Egypt. The Egyptians show that their sky differs to the others, that their enormous river possesses a nature of a kind unlike other rivers, and even their customs and laws are almost always the opposite to those of the rest of mankind.
Saqqara could be the most important site in Egypt. Because in this site, the kings of Dynasty II were buried here more than 5,000 years ago. But the most important thing about Saqqara is the Step Pyramid, the oldest pyramid in Egypt. That built by this genius architect, Imhotep, who designed the Pyramid of Djoser, the first king of Dynasty III, for the first time from a stone. No place in Egypt can compare with Saqqara. When you come with me and you enter under any pyramid or reveal any discoveries, we reveal magic and mystery. We reveal secrets from the sand.
For thousands of years, the necropolis in Memphis was used as a burial ground for people from every walk of life, from the very poor to nobles and pharaohs. An ideal location, therefore, from which to study the various ways in which one of the most sacred aspects of Egyptian civilization manifests itself: the cult of the dead.
The ancient Egyptians believed in an afterlife, perhaps even more important than their lives on Earth. Conceptions of this afterlife changed over time and according to social status, but in general, it was thought to be, at least in part, an echo of the ideal life on Earth. The ancient Egyptians imagined that their dead could eat, drink, breathe, enjoy their families, and carry out many of the activities that they had considered important during their lives. Several things were considered essential for a successful afterlife. One of these was some sort of tomb, and another was the cult of the dead. Egyptian tombs, whether royal or private, consisted of two principal parts. The burial place was where the body, ideally mummified and protected by coffins and sarcophagi, was stored, along with provisions for the afterlife. Associated with this was an area where the cult of the dead was celebrated. The cult of the dead would have been carried out by the heirs of the deceased, augmented in some cases by a professional priesthood. This cult would have begun with a properly executed funeral and continued, ideally for eternity, with a series of offerings of food and drink, burning of incense, and chanting of prayers. These rituals would have served to sustain the deceased in the afterlife and also to commemorate their lives on Earth, making their names live forever. The Egyptians were practical people and knew that their cults might not be carried out forever. So they created various magical substitutes, such as the scenes and texts we find on the walls of their temples and their chapels.
The Egyptians considered death as the passing from this world to the afterlife. But the journey was a risky one, and there were many obstacles which could prevent the soul of the deceased from reaching the afterlife. During the Old Kingdom, they used a selection of texts, now called pyramid texts, which were inscribed on the walls of the pyramids in order to overcome these dangers. These spells not only guaranteed the pharaoh's ascent to the gods, but also his reunion with Ra, god of the sun. The oldest example of these spells was discovered in 1881 inside the Pyramid of Unas, the last pharaoh of the 5th dynasty, who reigned around 2350 BC. The spells probably already existed in that era, but were only read out during the king's funeral service. It was Unas who decided to inscribe them on the walls of his pyramid. The purpose of this was to show his soul what it needed to do to reach the afterlife safe and sound. During the Middle Kingdom, around 2000 BC, priests decided to actually write these texts on the coffins. From the 18th dynasty onwards, around 1500 BC, they were written down on papyrus scrolls and collected together to form the Book of the Dead. They contained a series of magical and religious spells that would help the soul of the deceased in its journey to the afterlife. But what did the soul find once it arrived in the afterlife? It faced an underworld panel of judges presided over by Osiris, god of the underworld. The fate of the soul in the afterlife was decided here, based on how the deceased had lived his life on earth. The decision was made by means of a scale. If behavior had been immoral and dishonest, the soul was destined to suffer for all eternity. But if life had been irreproachable, the soul would enjoy a happy and eternal continuation of earthly life.
Burials of common people have been found at Saqqara, but these date to the later periods of Egyptian history and are mainly just bodies, sometimes in coffins or cartonnage or wrapped in reed mats in pits in the sand. Most of the tombs visible here, such as the one in which I'm standing now, belong to the elite, members of the nobility, officials in the royal administration, leaders of armies and expeditions, and priests. But dominating the site are 16 royal king's pyramids. The most important of these, the first pyramid, the first example of monumental stone architecture in the world, is the Step Pyramid of Djoser.
What do we know today about Pharaoh Djoser? In actual fact, very little. Very little information is known about this king, who reigned between 2680 and 2650 BC. His name, however, has been passed down through the centuries thanks to his tomb, the Step Pyramid. With its imposing size and 60-meter-high structure, this masterpiece has dominated the view of the Saqqara necropolis for 4,700 years. The pyramid's external shape makes it immediately recognizable and has helped to make it one of the most famous ancient Egyptian landmarks.
In the beginning, the tomb was just a bed, was dug in the ground. And after this, pharaohs found out that rains go through the body. Wild animals attack the body. So they start to cover this bed with some wood to protect it. And after this, they get idea to develop the tomb from just a bed. So they start to build two buildings, superstructure above the ground and substructure under the ground. And after this, the architect Imhotep covered the main shaft, the bed, with a cedar wood beams, and he built above it. He built a superstructure. He built mastaba. He built the first step, okay? And he did some additions to the sides. And he built the second step, third step, the first, the fourth, the fifth, the sixth, to get a step pyramid. The question now, why? It was a step pyramid for the soul to climb the pyramid, to go to the heaven, to unify with the sun god, Ra.
The inside of the structure is worthy of a lot more attention than it has so far received. The passageways run for kilometers underneath the pyramid. For centuries, these were used to deter robbers who risked getting lost in the tunnels. Many were seduced by the promise of riches, and after going inside, could not find their way out again. Few people are now able to enjoy the sight of these intricate underground passageways.
No one can believe that we are under the oldest pyramid in Egypt. Once the king lived here. You know, when I come to this place, I really want to say one thing. I want all of us who are listening to me now to remember this man, Imhotep, this genius man who invented the first ceiling made of limestone, who invented the first pillar. And he prepared this pyramid for His Majesty Zoser to be the burial place, to be a place for him to live for eternity. This is really the quest of immortality.
Restoration work is now mainly concentrated on the pharaoh's burial chamber, which was damaged when part of the ceiling collapsed. As well as covering the entire floor, the fallen beams and large blocks of stone broke Djoser's magnificent sarcophagus into several fragments. Despite the damage, this sarcophagus still provides a precious testimony to the technical and engineering skills of the ancient Egyptians.
People wonder all the time how the Egyptians were able to bring a huge lid like this, a huge sarcophagus like this that weighs more than 20 tons. And they bring it to this burial chamber. I can explain it to you. You will not believe it. They fill all this place with sand. And they bring the sarcophagus from that tunnel and they put it above the sand. And they take the sand from down and the sarcophagus will come down. This is to show how those Egyptians, the great people, were really thinking, using their mind more than using their muscles.
Traveling along the many kilometers of passageways under the Pyramid of Steps, other chambers can be reached, some of which were of great ritualistic importance.
One of the most amazing things that underneath this pyramid found thousands of stone vessels and pottery vessels everywhere. This is the offering room that with you now we can smell the past of mystery and magic.
What was discovered 30 meters below ground level has once again confirmed the unique position that the Pyramid of Djoser holds within the ancient Egyptian cultural scenario.
The pyramid was the tomb for the king, and the burial chamber was like the bedroom in his palace, because the pyramid was a symbolic palace. If you go at Giza pyramids, at Abu Sir, Saqqara, everywhere, you only know that queens were buried in small pyramids around the king. We call them subsidiary pyramids or pyramids of queens. But Zoser was the only king who gave permissions to be buried beside him. And he made for them beautiful sarcophagus made of alabaster. The queens of Zoser were very near to his heart. I do feel that Zoser gave permission to the genius architect Imhotep to be buried with him in this unique pyramid.
Imhotep was without doubt an ingenious architect and is believed to have been the first person to build using stone. Thanks to his insight, men started using more solid and durable materials, and as techniques evolved, they learnt to build bigger, taller, and more imposing constructions. The few representations of Imhotep that have been passed down to us conjure up the image of a small but ingenious man. But he was also the founder of Egyptian medicine, and it is this that has possibly earned him his place in history throughout the centuries. Unfortunately, the tomb of Imhotep has never been found. Does this tomb still exist? And what secrets might it be hiding?
We archaeologists, all of us, are searching around the pyramid, inside the pyramid. One day, maybe the secrets of the sand will reveal something about this architect. This will be the great discovery of the 21st century.
An enigma surrounds both the Step Pyramid of Djoser and the Great Pyramids of Giza, the lack of hieroglyphics. The generally accepted explanation is also the simplest. These are the most ancient pyramids of all, and at the time they were built, it was still not common practice to leave any writings inside. This could have made it difficult to assign the pyramids to their legitimate owners. So how can the archaeologists be so certain that the pyramid belonged to Djoser?
Archaeologists found a great discovery for us. They found a banner inscribed by hieroglyphs. We found the name of the king Zoser. Zoser? But in ancient time, his name wasn't Zoser. He was called Neterget. Neterget means a divine body. But in the New Kingdom, he was called Zoser.
The Pyramid of Djoser is the largest and most ancient of all the royal burial complexes in the ancient necropolis of Memphis. But it is not the only one. There are also several pyramids at the Saqqara site, all in various states of preservation. But each one has a story to tell. In many cases, the story is still waiting to be told.
I'm taking you to another adventure, going inside one of the most amazing pyramids. Very few cameras who entered inside. The pyramid is amazing, and the stories about the discovery is so unique that I will take you with me to see this pyramid of Sekhem-Khet, the last king of Dynasty 3.
Today, nothing remains of the upper part of the Pyramid of Sekhem-Khet, and it is only down to luck that it was discovered by Egyptian archaeologist Zacharia Goneim in 1954. This discovery made him extremely famous and caused jealousy among those that had not succeeded in a similar feat. He was therefore wrongly accused of stealing antiquities. The humiliation of being repeatedly interrogated by the police distressed him so much that he actually committed suicide. He was later found to be innocent.
When Zacharia Goneim, this great Egyptian, found the burial chamber, he came here and found this sarcophagus is completely sealed, intact. No one opened it before. It's made of alabaster. Then the press came here. Hundreds of people came around the sarcophagus. And even Nasser, President Nasser, in that time came in front of all the press. They opened the sarcophagus and they found nothing. Amazing story to show how archaeologists can be lucky and how many of them can be unlucky.
There are also some pyramids at Saqqara that were reserved for the queens. These were mostly the ones who had been honored for being chosen as the pharaoh's favorite wife.
This site can prove that we found at Saqqara only 30% of our monuments. We knew that this pyramid behind me is the pyramid of Queen Khwit, but no one ever excavated this pyramid. We were able to discover this pyramid. Khwit was the wife of King Titi, the first king of Dynasty 6. People always discover statues or tombs, but to discover a pyramid, it's amazing. This is one of the most exciting moments in my life. There is no camera ever entered this place. This is the first time for you to learn about thrill and exciting in archaeology. That's really the thrill. How do we learn from taking the sand away? When we entered in the burial chamber, and I saw this big, large granite sarcophagus. It's amazing. Inside, we found remains of a skeleton that I thought that this could be the skeleton of Queen Khwit, the main wife of King Titi, the first king of Dynasty 6.
The sands of the desert hide things well. It is down to the skills of archaeologists to discover that which otherwise would be lost forever. It is these skills that led to the discovery of the so-called headless pyramid, which was found in the northern part of Saqqara. Just like the pyramid of Sekhemkhet, nothing more remains of its upper part.
From looking at the size of the limestone that the Egyptian used to construct this pyramid, and even looking at the big, huge granite blocks, we can say that this pyramid belonged to Dynasty 5 about 4,400 years ago. This is the most recent discovery happened in Egypt, and I called it the headless pyramid.
Many tombs in Saqqara are still with us today. In addition to the pyramids, which were specifically built for the pharaohs, the most interesting tombs were those that belonged to the people who had worked directly for the king and were, when they died, therefore guaranteed treatment worthy of the rich and famous. Also of interest is the tomb of the pharaoh's two beauticians. Nyankhnum is on the left and Imhotep on the right. The tomb was discovered in 1964, and since then a lot has been said about the picture of these two men. Some people believe them to be very close brothers who had chosen to be depicted in this intimate pose. But it was actually this pose that led to speculation that they were actually a homosexual couple. However, this theory is scorned upon by many Egyptologists. So, who actually were these two men? The hieroglyphics and the scenes depicted in the tomb show that they were colleagues. They were, more specifically, Pharaoh Nussert's beauticians. He was one of the kings of the 5th dynasty and reigned about 2450 BC. Looking after the king's appearance was a very important job, and so they were very highly rewarded. The same can be said about another tomb discovered in 1964, that of Imhotep, a butcher who, like the beauticians, served Pharaoh Nusret. Although he wouldn't have had the same privileges, he probably earned a lot more money. His tomb was dug into the rock and would have taken 10 years of uninterrupted work to complete, and would have required significant financial resources. A mystery surrounds this tomb. An incomplete bas-relief and only partly finished walls prove that the tomb was never completed. Could the butcher have died prematurely before he could finish his tomb? Royal dentists were also among the privileged elite group of workers. Their tombs have only recently been discovered thanks to the work of some robbers. They failed in their search for treasures, and the archaeologists were able to bring to light the tombs of Imri and Kammisu. Pharaoh Userkaf was the first king of the 5th dynasty who reigned in about 2500 BC, and it was their job to take care of his teeth. Their tombs were made of mud bricks and were not meant to last forever, unlike those in stone. To guarantee that their bodies remained safe, they resorted to the most obvious solution: a curse. The inscription on one of the tomb doors is clear.
Whoever violates the sacredness of this place will be eaten by a crocodile.
Unfortunately, the threat didn't have the desired effect, but it shows us that they all resorted to curses in order to protect their eternal resting place. From humble dentists to pharaohs.
Death shall rapidly descend on those who dare to disrupt the pharaoh's sleep.
This threatening sentence was inscribed on Tutankhamun's tomb, which was discovered in 1922 by English archaeologist Howard Carter. Funded by the rich English nobleman Lord George Edward Carnarvon, Carter had been excavating in the Valley of the Kings for 10 years. But shortly before abandoning the search forever, he found the entrance to the tomb. Treasures were found in the tomb, the like of which had never been seen before. There were more than 5,000 antiquities crammed into a few square meters. Most of it was pure gold, and all of it priceless. It was the archaeological discovery of the century. The news soon traveled around the world, but what held the public's interest more than anything else was the curse of Tutankhamun. With the death of Lord Carnarvon only a year after the discovery of the tomb, belief in the curse took hold. In truth, very few fell victim to this alleged curse. Howard Carter died in 1939, 17 years after the discovery. Tutankhamun's anger should have been directed at Carter more than anyone else. If the curse had really existed, Carter should have been the first one to be struck down. Yet what seems to be just superstition does actually hold an element of truth, and a scientific explanation too.
Do you believe in curse? Well, it's a long story. I'm gonna tell you about it. You know, in ancient times, pharaohs were using some materials for mummification. By time, those materials poisoned the air of the tomb. So when the people discover a tomb, or archaeologists discover a tomb, they open the burial chamber and go through the burial chamber. They smelt this poison air, so they get cancer or they died. If I'm shaving my beard and we found a tomb, I cannot go inside the tomb because the skin, it will be open. So maybe I got bad, microbes or, a disease or something like this. But nowadays, when we found a tomb, what we're gonna do? We open the burial chamber and I think a candle. If the light of the candle is off, it means the chamber are poisoned. So I have to leave it open for 4 or 3 hours to refresh the air. So this is not connected by curse. It's connected by archaeology, by adventure in archaeology.
The purpose of these curses was to protect the deceased, starting with their burial. The tombs were destined to house the bodies of the deceased for all eternity. This was why they were built of stone, unlike houses which were built of mud bricks. But body preservation was also of vital importance, as the Egyptians were convinced that without it they would not be able to live forever in the afterlife. So, they perfected a fascinating technique which in some ways still remains a mystery: mummification. The ritual followed by the priests was very rigorous. They made an incision in the abdomen and removed the internal organs. Lungs, liver, stomach and intestines were removed and preserved in canopic jars.
They leave the heart inside because the heart was the place of knowledge.
After washing the body with palm wine, the priests inserted natron, a natural salt, silt, sawdust and mud from the Nile, into the abdomen. Then they would smear the body with aromatic oils and completely cover it with natron. This led to the complete dehydration of the body, which was then wrapped in several strips of linen bandages. The whole mummification process took 70 days. It was always believed that the brain was removed from the skull through the nose using long metal hooks. A recent discovery has shown that this wasn't always the case.
From the CT scan of the mummies that I did at the Cairo Museum, on my search for Queen Hatshepsut, I found they leave the brain inside.
The ancient Egyptians' cult of the dead also manifested itself through their religious respect for certain animals. They were treated as equals to the pharaohs and gods, both in life and death.
The ancient Egyptians thought that many animals were sacred, and they were all associated with different gods. So cows and bulls were sacred, you have crocodiles that are sacred, and even things that are very small, like scarab beetles, are sacred animals for the ancient Egyptians. The Egyptians considered certain animals more sacred than others because they were associated with important gods. So they would take the important aspects of a particular animal and tie it in with a divinity. So you have, for example, the sun god, Re. He was associated with all kinds of eagles or hawks because they, of course, fly up very high in the sky, are very powerful, and the color of their feathers is a lot like a hawk as well, and the sun, so that sort of ties in together. There are some animals, of course, who are mummified in a way that is very different to that of humans, and those are primarily birds, because we have thousands and thousands of votive ibis mummies, and also many hawk mummies. And these are not made by the usual way of mummification, but instead they would take the bird and dip it into a vat of boiling resin or pitch or bitumen, and then just take this and wrap it up, and that would be its mummification. With animal mummies, you have sacred animals who are supposed to have had the spirit of a god in their bodies when they lived, and when they die, the spirit of the god moves on to the body of a different animal of the same species. And these animals were very carefully treated and mummified because they were supposed to be divines on earth. And then, of course, they were buried. And they were buried in grand ways because they have huge stone sarcophagi. And then they're buried in these catacombs where you have passageways lined with
chambers which contain the sarcophagi and sometimes grave goods. So things like the Serapium at Saqqara or the sacred animal necropolis, which tunnels for several kilometers under the Saqqara plateau. You have these underground tunnels which are full with animal mummies.
The Serapium in Memphis is the cemetery of the sacred Apis bull, which was believed to be the living manifestation of the god Ptah, creator of the world. In 1850, Auguste Mariette was sent to Egypt by the Louvre Museum. During a visit to Saqqara, he noticed the head of a sphinx jutting out of the sand and linked it to others seen in Alexandria and Cairo. And suddenly, he just knew. He had found the Sphinx-lined avenue. It was 8 kilometers long and used by the priests to take the mummified body of Apis from the Temple of Mummification in Memphis to the Serapium. Because of problems with funding and red tape, a year passed before Mariette could enter the Serapium. He silently inspected the chambers by torchlight, followed behind by his assistants, and came across 24 huge sarcophagi. He realized that they had all been desecrated and emptied of their treasures and mummies, except for 2. In order to open them, he took drastic measures, dynamite. The 2 coffins were damaged, but Mariette achieved his aim. Through the opening created by the explosion, he could see what they contained, jewels and ornaments. Building work for the Serapium began around 1400 BC, during the reign of Imhotep II, a king of the 18th dynasty. We can tell that the complex was suddenly abandoned when the Romans conquered Egypt in 31 BC by the fact that an unfinished coffin was left abandoned in one of the galleries. God Apis had fallen into decline. New gods were to take his place. The ancient Egyptians were firmly convinced that there was an afterlife. The monuments, the texts, the tombs, and the entire cultural heritage they left behind help us to understand how important an eternal existence in the afterlife was to them. But they have given us very few indications of how they perceived their earthly lives.